Hi, I'm really happy we're all able to go forward with this virtual library publishing forum. I really look forward to watching and participating in other sessions. I'm Patricia Feeney, Crossref's head of metadata, and for this session, I'm going to discuss how Crossref metadata records work to make connections between researchers, research data, funders, and beyond. So for many of our members, the first steps of registering a DOI and basic bibliographic metadata, it's a really big one. In this session, I'm going to walk through what else publishers can do to enhance their metadata records to take the next steps with Crossref, and I'll also share our visions of an interconnected future. At Crossref, over the past decade, our metadata needs have shifted from collecting basic bibliographic metadata to match DOIs to citations to collecting metadata for distribution. We now support a range of metadata, from funding information to license information to information about whether content has been updated, retracted, or corrected, and we hope this will pick up momentum going forward. Our goal and mission is to make scholarly content easy to find, link, cite, and assess. We do this in part by registering identifiers, DOIs, for our members, but most of the work is done by the metadata records our members register for each DOI and the mechanisms we have in place to distribute and connect that metadata. So what is registered with us? We have over 113 million registered items. I did this chart at the beginning of March, but I don't think the overall percentages will have changed at all. We have mostly journal articles. The vast majority of the registered content with us are articles, but we have a fair number of book chapters and conference papers and reference entries. The other types of content we register are growing steadily. We accept registration of preprints and reviews for publishers who support open peer review. We also register standards and reports, and we're really hoping to grow the types of content we support in the future. We really want to reflect the needs of the scholarly community to make all kinds of scholarly related content discoverable and persistent. As a smallish nonprofit, for many years, we really had our hands full building our membership and making sure the identifiers we registered were persistent and discoverable. Our metadata development was focused on collecting mainly descriptive metadata that could be used to match DOIs to citations and could be used by metadata users to enhance their discoverability metadata. Metadata is a really powerful thing, as we all know, and our records have been expanding a bit organically beyond just bibliographic data. In addition to the funding and metadata data about licenses I mentioned earlier, we can also link research to clinical trials and data sets. And we're always expanding what the types of connections we're making through our metadata. My role in recent years has been focused on growing our metadata schema to be consistent with other metadata specifications and on building a metadata community so that we can meet the needs of our global membership, which is over 13,000 members strong. Currently, we collect all of the metadata you see here, and we'll be adding more, as well as adding more types of fully supported content. I want to take a minute to talk a bit about how we develop our metadata since we're changing it up a bit. We have a big schema update coming out soon, and I've been focusing on documentation and best practices quite a bit in relation to that. And I found it really useful to assess how our metadata fits with the Metadata 2020 metadata principles. For those of you who aren't familiar, Metadata 2020 is a collaboration between researchers, librarians, funders, and publishers who want to explore how to improve metadata for research. They've done quite a few collaborative projects and recently published these principles for developing metadata. They're fairly simple and aspirational, but they capture where we want our metadata to be. So I think it's a good practice to compare our metadata as it is to these aspirational principles. So the first principle is that the metadata be compatible, that it's open, interoperable, parsable, machine actionable, human readable. I think we do an okay job of that, pretty good job of that. Our metadata is freely available through our REST API in JSON. We also support content negotiation and deliver metadata through a few different formats. As far as inputting metadata, we have a strict metadata schema. It is our own schema and is not a standard because it was created for a very specific reason. But going forward, we really want to make developments more in line with other organizations. Many of our journal publishers use the JATS specification, for example, and I'm making changes in line with their recommendations just to make the transition from the journal's native format to Crossref a little more seamless. We're also trying to align our vocabulary with schema.org where we can, and also paying attention to Dublin Core and other specifications. It's a challenge to come up with a solution that works for everyone, so another forthcoming project is to map our schema to other specifications to make translations easier. Another principle is that metadata should be complete. We collect a lot of metadata and are adding more, but we do have minimal requirements to accommodate the publishing practices and capabilities of our members, which are very diverse. If you register metadata with us, you might want to take a look at your participation report. I've got a link here on the slide. These reports help you assess the completeness of your metadata. They tell you how many of your journal articles have references registered, how many of your book chapters have references registered, how many have license data, that sort of thing. Not all metadata is relevant to all content, so it's not a report card, it's more of just information to tell you what you've been registering with us. Since journal articles are commonly registered, and I know many of you register journals, I took a look at what metadata is registered for journal articles overall. Out of 81 million journal articles, almost half have references registered. 34 million have one ORCID ID, 10 million have some update information registered, a little over 9 million have an affiliation. We don't have a lot of affiliation metadata. 4 million have funder information. A lot of this metadata is applied to current records and not back records, so it might not have been relevant or recorded for items that were published in the 90s or 80s or before that has been digitized and put online. We don't have a lot of abstracts. Many publishers prefer not to make them freely available, but if you do want to distribute them, our subscribers ask for them quite often, so it's a good way to get them out there. Last but not least, we have been collecting metadata about related items. This means you can flag explicitly other items that relate to a piece of content. That means you can connect translations to the translated work. You can connect a preprint to the version of record. You can connect a data set to research outputs. You can connect a review to the reviewed item, and more by including that relationship in the metadata. Another principle is that metadata should be credible. I think we do a good job with this. Our metadata is supplied by our members, and the member currently responsible for maintaining each record, that's clearly defined in the record itself, so that's fairly transparent. We archive our own metadata with both Portico and clocks to ensure longevity as well. And is our metadata curated? We hope that our members curate the metadata they send to us. When they become a member, they commit to keeping their metadata current. This can mean updating URLs, but it also means keeping license information up to date, adding links to related objects, or making corrections. This is a bit of a mixed bag. We don't make corrections to metadata ourselves, so if an author reports a misspelled name, for example, we have to get the member to correct that, and that can be a little onerous on both ends. But overall, we're a big fan of persistent identifiers, and we make good use of them, both of our own and others registered and maintained by open community-led organizations. Persistent identifiers ensure persistence across time, and many deliver metadata that is machine readable, making it easier to keep metadata up to date and consistent. If compatible, curated, and complete metadata can be maintained by an invested organization, it makes sense for us to make good use of it. We are making active connections using PIDS, persistent identifiers. We can somewhat easily connect content registered with either Crossref or DataCite DOIs. DOIs can be included in citations or in relations. So that's the way we can connect a preprint to a journal article, for example. We also encourage members to include ORCID IDs for all contributors. This connects Crossref records to an author's ORCID profile, and our API can be queried for records including a given ORCID ID. We have a registry of funders and have assigned a funder identifier for each funder in that registry. This allows us to provide machine-readable information about who is funding what research. These DOI to DOI connections help, and identifier to identifier connections help us form a research nexus connecting all of these scattered but intimately related items. We're really beginning to build these relationships and make them available to the broader research ecosystem. And we're expanding on this. We began working with funders on a global grant identifier a few years ago. Each funder has its own way of representing similar metadata, making it a challenge to harvest. We've worked with them to identify the metadata they share and come up with a common metadata schema. And funders began registering grant identifiers with us last year as DOIs. We've got a few funders on board, and we have quite a few more who are interested in registering funding information with us. We'll be accepting them in the publication records that publishers register this year. So this means if a grant identifier is included in a journal article, the grant information is clearly identified. You can see who the funder is, and also the amount and type of grant, who the investigators are, and what project the grant is applied to, and all sorts of dates associated with the grant and that sort of thing. We'll also allow funders to link out from grants to research outputs and be able to connect those relationships recursively in metadata records. We'll also soon begin registering identifiers for conferences. This is a joint effort with DataCite. We currently register DOIs for conference proceedings and papers, but we're expanding that to identify conference events themselves. This kind of identification metadata can really help with efforts to identify predatory conferences, and it also connects events with proceedings, posters, videos, and other conference materials. We're also expanding our schema to include affiliation identifiers like ROAR, an open community-led identifier for organizations, and we'll be accepting other identifiers for contributors, organizations, and in citations. Accepting non-DOI identifiers in citations will help quite a bit with data citations, as not all of them are identified with a DOI, and we historically haven't collected much data-specific metadata in citations, but we're going to be expanding that because we think it's really important to be able to connect data sets to journal articles and beyond. So we are working to empower our metadata, but it really depends on our members. If you publish and are a member, please look at what you're sending us and consider sending more. I've also been working with a group of invested members in a metadata interest group. It's been a bit quiet recently because of the pandemic, but I'm hoping to pick things up in the coming weeks, so please contact me if you're interested. Also, all of our metadata is available via our REST API, so you can look at your own metadata or look at other metadata that you need. Thank you very much. Please feel free to, I know there'll be a Q&A after the session, but if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email or reach out to me on Twitter. Thank you.